I'd like you to imagine for just a moment, use your imaginations, that you wake up tomorrow morning, there's no electricity and there's no gas. Whatever's happened is significant and there's not going to be any electricity or any gas for a long, long time, maybe months, maybe years. This sounds very far-fetched, but there was actually an article in the Los Angeles Times on Tuesday talking about this very possibility. But the reason I want you to think about it today is think about how you would cook. If you couldn't go out in the kitchen and turn a dial or push a button, how would you cook? Now, when I ask this to groups, and I've never spoken to a group this large before, but when I ask this to smaller groups, I ask them to start thinking about this, and the first thing someone says, and it's usually a guy, sorry guys, is, oh, I'll use my microwave. And I say, no, you can't use your microwave because there's no electricity. But I understand why he would say that, because we are so accustomed to pushing a button or turning a dial that we don't even think about how we cook. So I let the audience think for another minute, and then someone says, and it's usually a guy again, I'll use my gas grill. And that's great, because your gas grill is a good backup. But after a week, if you're cooking every meal with your gas grill, the canister will run out. And remember, in this scenario, there are no refills. Now, imagine if you had nothing else, what would you use to cook with? And someone will finally say, well, I'll go out and chop some wood off one of my trees and make a fire. Yes, you would. That's about it. But imagine, again, this is going to go on for weeks, months, maybe years. Who in your family gets to go out and gather that wood? What will your neighborhood look like in 6 weeks, 6 months, a year? This imaginary scenario is actually not imaginary for 2.5 billion people on our planet. 2.5 billion people on this planet still live by gathering fuel and making fires and cooking their food over fires every day. Despite all my travels that Wilma mentioned, I've lived overseas much of my adult life. I was never aware of this. I never thought about this because cooking had always been something that was just very easy for me, or someone else did it for me. It never occurred to me that people had to go out and gather fuel, that this many people, 2.5 billion people, were going out and gathering fuel until in 2005, I was sent to Afghanistan by the State Department as an embedded reporter, but as a diplomatic reporter. So I was embedded with a British infantry unit in northern Afghanistan. My job was to report back to the State Department what I was seeing on the patrols. I'd go out on these patrols with 2 vehicles. We used unarmored vehicles and 6 soldiers. They had weapons, but we had a very low profile, so we didn't wear body armor or helmets. And we went all over northern Afghanistan, sleeping in tents on the ground and meeting with villagers. My job was to report on Taliban incursions, warlord fighting, drug trafficking, disease outbreaks, that sort of thing. But because I was so close to the ground, I was closer to the ground literally than I'd been in any of my other overseas jobs. As a diplomat, I rode around in a car, that I started noticing things that I had never noticed before. First thing I noticed was that in Afghanistan, which is in Central Asia, it's very sunny. Most of the year it's sunny. Even in the winter when it's freezing cold, between snowstorms it's sunny. The second thing I noticed was there were no trees. And I asked people as we drove around, the only trees left were in the river valleys, there were orchards. I asked people about this. I said, where are the trees? Well, the trees had all been cut down for firewood over many decades and hundreds of years, literally, but now there were more people, so the trees couldn't grow back fast enough, so they were gone. People actually guarded their orchards at night, because if they didn't, someone was going to chop down those trees. And I'd seen orchards where the trees had been chopped down at night and used for firewood. But the thing I noticed that really got my attention was little children, 5- and 6-year-old children, who were leaving their villages every day to gather firewood. Now, they weren't really gathering wood anymore. They were pulling little bushes up out of the ground. And I see these little lines of children with these huge piles of brush on their backs, hauling this back to their villages so their mothers would have something to cook with. And I have some photos over on the table there if you want to come over and have a look after I talk. All this combined, and I was processing it, but nothing had really sparked yet until we were coming back from a patrol, heading home, back to camp, driving west. The sun was setting. It was a cold March day. The sun was in our eyes. And suddenly, who knows why, I remembered that when I was a Girl Scout, yes, I was a Girl Scout, a proud Girl Scout, in the 50s, we built a little solar cooker, a little box of cardboard and foil and glass, and we had melted s'mores. All you Girl Scouts know what I'm talking about. Graham cracker, Hershey bar, and a marshmallow. We'd melted s'mores, and so I didn't know anything about this technology except that I remembered that I had done this, and I thought, these people in Afghanistan, there's lots of sun, there's no wood, and these poor little kids who should be in school are out pulling bushes up out of the ground. So I got back to camp that night, and I went on the internet, and I Googled solar cooking, and I found a website of a group called Solar Cookers International, which I had never heard of. It's a California-based nonprofit. They're in Sacramento. And they had designs for solar cookers, so I printed some out. I got some cardboard and foil from the British Army field kitchen in our camp, and some of the soldiers helped me. We built some little solar cookers out of cardboard and foil. And then we tested them on the roof of our camp. One of them, which was made of cardboard and foil but folded up into a little square, boiled water faster than any of the other ones. So I decided I was going to take that on the next patrol and demonstrate it in the village. And I'll just show you what it looked like, because it's a little tiny thing. That's it. I'm going to open it up, but not now. I'll open it up afterwards, so come over and see it. Anyway, this little tiny piece of cardboard opened up with a pot in it would actually boil water. So we got into this village. We never stayed very long in any village because for our own security, but we had a meeting, and it was around lunchtime, so I opened up the little solar cooker, which looks like sort of like a clamshell with a shiny paper inside, and I put a pot in it, and I poured a liter of water in, put a lid on, and there were a few men watching. This is way up in the mountains in the Hindu Kush. There were a few men watching us, and they're scratching their beards and their turbans and wondering, what is this crazy woman doing? I went into the meeting with the soldiers. We were meeting with the village headman. We came out an hour later, and I knew that pot would be boiling, and it was. And there was a huge crowd of men. Now, there must have been about 40 men. No women, because women in rural Afghanistan do not go out in public. So it was all guys. And they knew, because the few who had seen me set this thing up, knew that I did not light a fire. This pot was boiling, but no one had built a fire. So they wanted to know how it worked. So with my interpreter's help, I explained to them that the sun hit the shiny paper and reflected on the pot and got hot enough to boil water. One of the men shouted out, "We could make tea with this." And I said, yeah. Now, in Afghanistan, like in all Islamic countries, alcohol is forbidden. Now, I will tell you off the record that you can get alcohol pretty much anywhere in Afghanistan, but it's forbidden. So the men and the women drink a lot of tea. So I said, yes, you could heat water for tea with this, and you could have hot water all day. I said, your wives could cook with this too. They could cook rice and meat, beans with this. And then another man said, we have cardboard. This is a very remote village up in the Hindu Kush. He said, we have cardboard, but where do you get that shiny paper? Well, the shiny paper was aluminum foil, and there was no aluminum foil for sale within hundreds of miles of where we were. So I didn't know what to say until one of the guys reaches under his blankets, and he pulls out a pack of cigarettes. And he lifts up the foil, and he said, we can use this. And then a bunch of the other men pull out their cigarettes, and I thought, oh my God, they're all going to smoke themselves to death so they can make a solar cooker. But, yeah, that was horrible. But it was also wonderful because it was this instant technology transfer. These guys, in 5 minutes, these were illiterate mountain men. In 5 minutes, they had figured out a use for this really strange thing, heating water for tea, and then they'd figured out a way to make it themselves of something they had, their cigarette foils. I got back to camp that night and I reported on our meeting to the embassy, but I also reported my solar cooking discovery. And I was so excited about it, and I wrote in my report, I said, is the embassy doing anything about this? Because I was a kindergartner as far as solar cooking was concerned, but I knew now that this had potential for these people. The response I got back was quite surprising and disappointing. The response was, USAID, which is our development agency, has tried these in other countries, they don't work, so we don't support the technology, get back to your reporting. Okay. I got back to my reporting because that was why I had been sent to Afghanistan, but I was hooked. I knew I wanted to do more with this technology. So when I got back to Washington, after my one-year tour in Afghanistan, I began to learn more about the technology, and I wanted to tell people, I wanted to share it with people, what I was learning. I was meeting more people involved in the technology. My year in Afghanistan had been, in addition to my solar cooking epiphany, thanks to the Girl Scouts, it had also been a traumatic year, a fascinating year, an amazing year, and I had to process all this. I also I had to acknowledge after about 6 months, a year after I came back, that I had a very small case of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I came back, I was very lucky, I came back in one piece. Nothing happened to me physically. But some of the young British soldiers that I served with did not come back. Some were injured. And the stress of going on these patrols and being sort of undefended, I guess, had an impact on me. And I was afraid to go outside at night in my very well-lit Virginia neighborhood. I'm now a Californian, but I was living in Virginia then. I was afraid to pick up trash, and as a Girl Scout, we always pick up trash and put it in the trash barrel. I was afraid to pick it up because I thought it would blow up in my hands. So to process this, I decided I was going to write about my experiences, and I decided that the best way that I could reach a big audience was to write a novel. A really good story based on my year, but with fictional characters and a really good plot and subplots. So I went out and bought some books on how to write a novel, and I had a journal, because I'm a journal keeper, so I had my journals. I began writing the novel, and it took me, I started in 2007 after I left the State Department, and I finished it in 2009. Well, by 2009, I was also becoming very involved with the promotion of solar cooking. I had joined the board of directors of Solar Cookers International, and that was taking up a lot of my time, but I was also finishing my novel. And the story is, there's an American female diplomat who's in Afghanistan the same year I was there, but I made her a lot younger than I was. I was 58 when I went to Afghanistan, so I was old enough to be everyone's mother in that camp. But in the novel, I wanted my main character to have a romance, so I knocked about 12 years off and made her in her mid-40s so she could have a great romance with a British Army major. So you have to read the book to find out what happens. But all the characters in the book were composites. I also had to protect the identity of the people I'd worked with, so I couldn't make it very clear who they were. So they're composite characters. For me, it was a great catharsis, the writing of the book, and it also allowed me to share my solar cooking epiphany with people. I had planned to self-publish my book, and in 2009, I finished the manuscript. I was about to go off to Chad to a refugee camp where there was a solar cooker project, and a group of us were going to do an evaluation and then make recommendations of how they could make them better. The refugee women were actually building these solar cookers, the same kind that I just showed you. A friend suggested I enter my manuscript in the Amazon contest, which I'd never heard of, and so I did. And I went off to Chad, and 6 months later, I was in the supermarket in Virginia, and the phone rang in my pocket, and it was Amazon telling me that I'd won. I won the contest. Well, the prize, 5,000 people entered, and my novel won, was a publishing contract with Penguin Books, which was really cool. Thank you. So I got the publishing contract with Penguin Books, and the book came out a year later. I was getting, as I said, more involved with this, but I was also in Washington trying to promote this technology, and I'd learned that the U.S. government at that time was about to inaugurate a program to promote clean cook stoves. And I went to all the meetings, and they were only talking about stoves that burn things. At each meeting, I would raise my hand at the end, and I would say, we need to include solar cookers in this initiative, because during the day, people can cook with the sun. I was actually asked by a senior government official to stop bringing up solar cookers. Well, I didn't, of course. And then I continued attending these meetings and saying, we have to include this technology. We have to fund this technology too. And then another government official approached me and said, look, Pat, you're being too aggressive and you're alienating people. You have to back off on this. How many of us have been told we're too aggressive, right, when we're talking about something we believe in? Well, I didn't back off. I've continued to promote this technology, and I will continue to do so. But in addition to my work with the solar cooking, my little book was published in 2011, and then in 2012, it was published in paperback, and it won the San Diego Book Award, which was very exciting. And then my nephew, my wonderful nephew, who is a student at UCSD, nominated my book for One Book, One San Diego. I didn't make it, but I appreciated my nephew nominating, because I think this novel, which talks about Afghanistan and women's rights and post-traumatic stress disorder, would be an appropriate discussion book for this community, because we have a lot of military personnel here, but we also have a lot of sunshine, because it's San Diego, right? So we need to talk about sun. The last thing that happened with my book was that I received a letter and a package from a professor of screenwriting at UCLA. He said, I read your book. This should be a movie. This would be a great movie. And I thought, yeah, it would be a great movie. He sent me his textbook on screenwriting. He said, read my book, do the homework, and write a screenplay. So I did, and I finished the screenplay last year. I don't have an agent because I never needed one because my book was published when I won the contest. But I've gotten a lot of rejection letters, and I was told I needed an agent, so I've started looking for agents, and now I'm getting rejection letters from agents too. That's okay, but that's good. But BBC Films they want to talk to my agent, so as soon as I find one, we'll start the conversation. My main avocation now really is promoting this technology, because I know how many people it can affect if we promote it. And I'm not going to stop talking about it. I'm not going to stop annoying the U.S. government. And we're moving, more of us, the movement is gathering and growing, and I think we are going to change this policy. But I want to leave you with this thought. Enough solar energy hits planet Earth in 1 hour to power all human activity for a year. That is a lot of solar energy. My goal is kind of big. I want to change U.S. government policy, and I want to help those 2.5 billion people who are still gathering fuel and building fires to cook their food, when I know that during the day, on sunny days, and in the developing world there are a lot of sunny days, they could cook food and boil water all day long using no fuel at all and creating no smoke at all. That's my goal. I'm 66 years old now. I got a lot of fight left in me, and I'm going to keep working until we accomplish this goal.